Book of the Stranger. This year's 4th episode was another major hit in what is proving to be a very strong and popular Season 6. Right now, the episode's sitting at 9.3 on IMDb, which would put it in or around the top 10. At the end of the season, we'll check in again on which episodes are the top 10 based on IMDb ratings. But for now, this one's really close to the top. Not the top, but up there pretty high. Yet this high standard, or standing, whichever you want to call it, is atypical because most of the top-rated Game of Thrones episodes feature a lot of action. That's the thing that sort of bumps them up to the next level in popularity. And those episodes tend to be towards the end of the season, not in this first half. So this episode, unlike Hardhome, Blackwater, The Mountain of the Viper, you get the picture. Those are some of the other highly rated ones, and you can understand why those are so highly rated. You can see the common theme with those, which is, again, the action. This episode is winning acclaim for other reasons. The pacing is excellent. The scenes relate to each other in many subtle and clever ways. The themes are also clear and strong. There's genuine emotional payoff, strong dialogue ranging from passionate to badass, and comic relief without dialogue. Very good facial acting. We book readers tend to be far more critical than the show-only folk, mostly because we have expectations, and we love the source material so much we hate to see it change. This episode was widely applauded by book readers, however, except for the final scene, which really divided people, and of course we'll talk about that in due time. The Targaryens are not fireproof argument has been in the fandom since before the show even existed, so a lot of people really have had an opinion on this for a long time, and so it was a little jarring to see it this way, but we're here to unpack that and discuss the differences and remember and remind that book canon is not show canon, for better or worse, as how painful that can be sometimes. That's the way it is. And so we can be fair in liking it or not liking it. That's up to us. But as far as judging it, we have to be fair in recognizing that one canon is different than the other. Now, when I first watched the scene, I thought it was way over the top and a bit silly. But after watching it again and again and analyzing it, I actually think it fits nicely, and it was completely set up in advance in terms of the show. The things that I thought didn't make sense the first time through actually kind of worked well once I sat back and reflected on it, once I got rid of my book reader's angst, which is hard to set aside, I know, but we can do it from time to time. So we'll break down all that more thoroughly during this review, of course. This is just my opening spiel, and it's just an overview. So let's get into the details. First off, welcome back to the Radio Westeros team. Hey, Lady Gwyn, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, nice shirt you got there.
Thank you. I give a shout out to Tana Ford, our friend from Westeros Wheneverly podcast, who made this cool drawing of us for our website.
Very cool. And welcome back as well, Yolkboy.
Hi, Aziz. Really glad to be back again.
Right on. We're keeping you up late there in England today, but you're sticking with us and hanging tough as we have fun talking about this episode. Like I said, we'll give as we usually do, we'll give our ratings at the end of the episode. We'll give the 8.x, 7.x, 9 possibly. But what were your guys' initial impressions of the episode as far as just, not dialing down a rating, just how did it make you feel, good, bad, positive, mixed? A little of both, maybe?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I really enjoyed the episode. I thought it was kind of on a par with last week. I didn't love all of it, but I thought overall it was a very enjoyable episode. And again, this season is so much better than last season. I'm feeling a lot better about Game of Thrones these days.
Yeah, it's nice when they do a good job. We don't have to pretend to like it or act like look for things to like. It's just there's just a lot to like.
Yeah, there was a lot to like here. Some things, a couple weaknesses, but we'll talk about those. So overall, pretty good.
Cool. All right. So as usual, we will talk about spoilers for the next episode, episode 5, which we have some advanced knowledge of based on trailers, etc. But we won't spoil any of that. During this episode, we'll talk about it after the credits, as usual, so stay tuned for that if you are interested in that part of the discussion. Let's talk about some themes as we work our way towards the details. We'll look at some overarching situations. The Book of the Stranger, of course, is the title. There's reuniting especially brother-sister type deals, Sansa and Jon, Asha or Yara. I can't get that straight. I always just call her Asha. And since this is a book readers podcast, you guys know who I'm talking about. But even in the show-only episode with Sean, I kept calling her Asha. I'm like, oh, wait, I mean Yara? Yeah, it's very confusing. So, compromise, though. That's another big theme. Making peace with enemies, not friends, like Tyrion says, and which Missandei repeats. There's men giving up and women rallying. That's an important theme. Contempt. That's a big one. Underestimating one's enemies is a huge part of this episode. Multiple people pay the price for underestimating their foes, and multiple others are being set up for that exact same fate. Now, thanks to Watchner Operative Platypus, great name, by the way, we learned a few more things. The biblical book of Revelations is something of a parallel to the book of the Stranger if we relate the faith of the seven to real-world Christianity, which it does have a lot of parallels to. Come and see is apparently in the book of Revelations as a line by the beast, which signifies the devil. Ramsay is playing the role of a devil in a sense here. That's kind of neat. He says come and see in his version of the pink letter. Judgment Day is a big part of the book of Revelations, and one famous interpretation of this is Dante's Inferno and the artwork surrounding it. Pretty much what the call's got, right? Daenerys' Inferno instead of Dante's Inferno, but pretty similar, right? So that's neat. I like those themes. Now, I'm no biblical scholar, and our operative platypus is not either, as she told us when she sent us that message. So apologies if we're a little loose with the details of the Bible there, but it sounds like a loose parallel or a strong parallel either way. One other thing I want to clear up before we get into the first scene is talking about Luke Roberts, who was the actor playing Arthur Dayne. Now, we talked about how it was hard to find a guy of his talent and sword fighting skills. Well, there's a reason for that. He doesn't have those sword fighting skills, apparently. The guy doing the actual sword fighting was a stuntman, a sword fighting guy who taught them some moves, including young Ned. His name is Vladimir Furdik, and he's also playing the Night's King, so that's pretty cool. So we will be seeing more of him. We haven't seen him yet, but whenever the Night's King returns to the show, which is bound to happen, then we'll know, hey, that's Arthur Dayne. So that's cool. Also, one more announcement. We're going to have a live recording at 4:30 on, 5 on, I believe I said it for 5. I'm already forgetting what time I said it. I believe it said for 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time next week for the show-only review, not for book readers, the show-only review, which I know some of you watch both, so we're announcing that here. It's already been posted on Google+, the event time. You can sign up and watch us live while we record. And that way the episode will be a little bit sooner. All right, yolkboy, let's talk about the wall. I'm going to take it over to you, and you lead us into this.
Okay, let's talk about the wall. The first thing to say about the wall is what a great melting pot we now have there. Over the seasons, characters have got more and more spread about in Westeros, and their storylines became more and more disparate. But now we're seeing things start to come together, and it's really exciting, and the wall is the prime example. We now have Jon, Sansa, Brienne, Pod, Davos, Mel, Tormund, and Ed all together in close proximity at the wall, and it's just so exciting because there's so many intriguing dynamics between these characters, and this episode did not disappoint in that regard. And now we'll go through some of those interesting interactions.
Right on. It starts with Ed and Jon, which is something we talked about last week. We expected that this would happen, some sort of Ed confronting Jon about feeling abandoned, about how can you leave when you know it's out there. You know, I was at Hardhome with you. And Jon has a good point, though. It's not only is he, just been murdered, and that's just something we don't understand how it makes you feel, but he talks about the fact that the Night's Watch didn't really want him, and he only hanged the ringleaders. The Bowen Marsh and Alistair Thorne and Othel Yarrick and Ollie, but there were other men there for the stabbing, and others probably supported it, or at least didn't, support their Lord Commander. So there's a lot of weight behind his argument that he's not wanted there, and it's not just that he's not wanted, it's that these people, well, I would say tried to kill him, but they really did succeed in killing him. It's just that it was undone. So it's also interesting to note that not much time has passed here. Jon has probably only been alive again for a day or two. He's in the early stages of being reborn. He's like, I want to use the term infancy, but rebirth infancy, but that's a bit too meta pun there. But it does give us, so we don't really know what type of person he is yet. We don't know exactly how his outlook is gonna change. This is all very new and fresh and still forming. But we have some insight onto who he is and who he's becoming. Last week we brought up a letter from a watcher who told us of his experience being in a coma-like state, what it's like to be basically dead. We've since gotten 2 more somewhat similar emails. The tone is also similar as well. The common thread from these are very touching and personal letters, so I do thank those of you out there that sent those. They wanted to remain anonymous, all of them, so we'll certainly honor that. But all of them said that the experience teaches you to respect life more, motivates you to really live it, get the most you can out of it. And from Jon's perspective, what has he done? He's done all these awful things. He had to kill Qhorin Halfhand. He had to kill Ollie. He had to be betrayed by his own people. He had to be, he was rejected by the female half of his family, meaning Catelyn. And as Sansa pointed out, she was kind of crappy to him when he was growing up. So, he's kind of lost and betrayed, and he doesn't want to be working alongside men who tried to kill him or who did kill him. So you can kind of understand where he's coming from, and it's just really hard to see where it's going. But is this moot? Is this all moot? Because he wants to leave, he wants to get out, he wants to go do his own thing, but he's clearly not going to. He gets pulled back in by the arrival of Sansa. So the big question here is this going to be similar to the book version of Jon? We've predicted in the past that he'd be wilder, guessing that he'll spend more time in Ghost. Is he still going to go through this existential crisis in the book, wanting to leave? Or is the wolf aggressiveness going to be driving him, and he's just going to be more focused on what he wanted to do? Along the lines of Beric, who is very focused on what he wanted to do, and Stoneheart focused on revenge. Maybe Jon will just be more focused on doing his duty. So it could be very different. And it's confused by the fact that the book timeline is so very different. Here, Jon is going after Ramsay after he's been resurrected. In the book, Jon has just decided to go after Ramsay and loudly announces it, and then he gets stabbed, and that's his final chapter. So a lot of open questions that we're not going to really try to answer. We're just going to throw them out there for you all to consider on your own. Will he be bitter like Show Jon? Well, how many memories will he lose? Is he going to? How much of the Beric Dondarrion aspect is going to fall? Obviously, Beric was killed several times, and he lost more of himself over time. Jon, it's hard to say. He might be dead longer. He might be dead shorter. What do you think, Yolkboy?
Well, if we expect Jon to also exit the Night's Watch, this could be part of his reasoning there too. There's this technicality of shall not end until my death, and the overwhelming feeling of betrayal from the Night's Watchman that could play the same role. And unless Jon ceases to be a POV, and I really hope that's not the case because I enjoy his POVs, we will be able to see all of this through his thoughts and see what he thinks on all these matters. That's a really big thing to look forward to in the Winds of Winter, I think, and Jon will be incredibly conflicted, and he will be probably having an altered personality and memories and so on, as you mentioned.
Right, and we start the scene, good points by the way, but we start the scene with a shot of Longclaw. It's a really nice shot. You get to see the detail of the hilt. It's pretty cool. The wolf head foreshadowing his reunion with family, i.e. House Stark, the direwolf sigil, obviously. Not just reunion, but recommitment. And symbolically, it's Ed who picks Longclaw up and looks at it, and it's sort of like Ed is kind of getting in the way, saying, hey, Jon, what about your duty? What about this commitment? What about your former commitment, the one that you were so big on before? And then they argue about it. Now, given time, maybe Ed could have convinced Jon to stay, after all. Maybe Jon would come around a bit. He didn't exactly have a plan on what to do. He just wanted to go south, get warm. He makes that joke. But, so that, I think, maybe Ed could have talked him out of, given time. But, bam. Sansa arrives. Everything changes there. He's reunited with Sansa, learns about Rickon, and he no longer is without a plan.
Yeah, fittingly, this argument is interrupted by Sansa's arrival, but really, her arrival ends the argument for good. Ed is not going to even try to argue Jon out of saving his own family. And we see Ed sheepishly smile at Sansa during the meal later, so any kind of argument seemed to have been quelled over there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's I like that look he gave her there. It was kind of like maybe he was just like a little bit smitten, which that's not surprising. As Dollar said, a brother of the Night's Watch. He doesn't see women too often, and here comes Sansa. So anyway, I'm going to guess Sansa. By the way, with Jon's backing. This is going to promise to help the Wall once they deal with Ramsay, and that will be like a compromise of sorts. She's like, look, I'm leaving. I'm not, but I will. I'm not going to just abandon you entirely. We're still going to, once we take care of the situation in the North, we're not going to just leave you. We're not just going to leave you, Ed. We're not going to leave you and the Night's Watch to defend the realm by yourselves. I think something's going to be worked out along those lines. I don't know exactly what, but they're not just going to abandon Ed. That's not how it's going to end. I don't think. So I think there'll be some sort of, look, man, we'll be back. We'll be back. Don't worry about it. Just let us deal with these Boltons. Well, this Bolton. There's just the one now. So speaking of Jon and Sansa, now this is, it gives us, it's so funny that this is such an important reuniting when these characters never really had anything between them before, but it still was really powerful. Lady, go ahead and tell us your thoughts on this.
Oh, this was amazing. I cried every time I've watched it so far. I might start crying now talking about it. It's very emotional. D&D, gotta give them all the credit because they've given us something that George hasn't and probably won't for a long time yet. It's a Stark reunion. Personally, I think the Jon and Sansa reunion will be the first one that we do get to see in the books, and that it's the one that's most clearly telegraphed on the page. But I do feel like it's a long ways off. The first time we've seen, this is the first time we've seen Jon and Sansa on page together. Definitely in the show and even in the books. Jon's POV at King Robert's welcoming feast was the last time they were actually together. They weren't interacting though. Jon was just observing her. So it's been a long time coming. Although they do appear in each other's thoughts throughout the books, Jon thinks of Sansa as my sister numerous times, asserts her rights to Winterfell to Stannis. When Stannis offers him Winterfell, he kind of stands up and he says, no, it belongs to my sister Sansa. And he really actually has a number, I looked at them today, of quite tender memories of Sansa, including one that says he found himself thinking of his sisters, perhaps because he dreamed of them last night. Sansa would call this being the snowfall beyond the wall, an enchantment, and tears would fill her eyes at the wonder of it. So he does have these kind of sweet memories of her, while for her part, most of us will remember that Sansa thinks of Jon mostly as her half-brother, or her bastard brother, when she does think of him. But she does think of him on quite a few occasions. She remembers Jon up at the wall. She prays for him in the Sept before the Battle of Blackwater. And then in A Feast for Crows, when he's mentioned by Miranda Royce in that kind of scene where Miranda might be twigging something about who Elaine Stone really is.
Oh, yeah.
Sansa shows kind of a more, like maybe she's grown a little bit in the way she thinks about Jon, because it says she had not thought of Jon in ages. He was only her half-brother, but still, with Robb and Bran and Rick undead, Jon Snow was the only brother that remained to her. And she goes on to think, I'm a bastard too now, just like him. Oh, it would be so sweet to see him once again. So she's kind of grown, in that feeling of closeness towards him. So.
D&D gave us that sweetness after all.
Yeah.
How nice. So it's the big differences there that's clear from that, as great as that is in making those comparisons. You see how different they are book to show in terms of the circumstances, not necessarily their attitudes, which I think those are similar. I think the way Jon and Sansa react to each other is probably pretty similar to how they would react to each other in the books. But the details of their lives, as bad as they both are significantly different, especially with the information available to them. Both book versions of Sansa and Jon don't know about their brothers being alive, and Arya is just a mystery to them entirely. Sansa gets to fill Jon in on all that because she knows that they're alive, and both from Theon and Brienne, respectively. So this is all done off screen. They fill each other on all these things. Jon presumably talks about how he was dead, about the White Walkers, and Sansa would, likewise fill him in on the fact that their family is more alive than they thought by a lot. Her marriage to Tyrion, the time with Littlefinger. Now, it's too bad in the sense we didn't get to hear them chat about all that, but that was a long list of things they had to catch up on. So it'd be, it would have been a long conversation for TV, I think. So I think the way they handled it is just fine. What about you, Yolkboy? What did you get from that little bit?
Well, we're talking about things that have been a long time coming, right? It's really great to see Sansa, who has previously been this pawn in other people's games, people using her for their own ends, and now she's finally gaining autonomy and becoming a player herself. And we see her making her own moves, and she's got ambitions. She knows what she wants, and she's trying to make it happen. And it's great to see this part of her character development after the kind of horrors of last season. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, and she's basically leading Jon at this point. Jon just wants to give up, and that's one of those themes we were talking about. He wants to quit, he wants to give up, but once it's his family, she's like, look, you're not quitting now, right? And he's like, yeah, you got me. I'm in. He's committed. And once they pull him back in. So let's talk about Davos and Melisandre. As Yolkboy said, there's a lot of different characters interacting at the Wall right now. It's really interesting. And some of these things we didn't even necessarily see coming, even though they were kind of obvious, especially Brienne getting involved with Melisandre and Davos. Not only did we not talk about that last week, not only did we mention the possibility was coming, I don't think anyone even mentioned it to us in the comments or tweeted at us or anything. And usually when we miss something, you watchers catch it quickly because you guys are really smart too, and you're expecting us to talk about certain things, and if we don't, you bring it to our attention. And I don't think anyone even mentioned that to us. And it's just this whole Brienne Melisandre thing is really interesting. But it doesn't start with that. It starts with Davos confronting Melisandre. Now, Yolkboy, tell us about that.
Yeah, really glad that they're following up the burning of Shireen. And I'm really pleased that Davos hasn't kind of forgotten, and D&D are just going to sweep that issue under the carpet and pretend that Davos and Shireen weren't close or something. It's coming to the fore now. There could be serious consequences for Mel later in the season, I think. I get the sense that this story isn't yet done with what happened with Shireen. I think we're being shown this conflict for a reason. And a watcher called Lady Storch wrote to us with an interesting idea that Davos might find Shireen's carved stag that he made for her by a pile of ashes. Remember, he made her that really intricate carved stag just before she was burnt. And then he could really work out what happened to her if he finds this by the ashes. Shireen might have taken the stag, onto the pyre, but she could have possibly dropped it on the way or something. So I think it's an interesting idea to be considered, and it makes you think. And yeah, like I said, I think there's really good reason to be concerned with Mel's welfare. Not now, not in the next couple of episodes, but towards the end of the season. With this undercurrent of Shireen's demise still looming, there still might be a confrontation later. Remember that Davos has already tried to kill Mel before. I think that was in season 2, was it, or season 3?
I don't remember, but yeah, it was right before he gets thrown in jail. Right around that time. Anyway, another little undercurrent to that scene I thought was very subtle was that during this argument, it's the second important argument interrupted in this first scene where Jon is talking to Ed, and the horn interrupts them, Sansa's arrival, which was really sneaky the way that was done, as Yolkboy pointed out. And it sort of happens here as well, as Brienne as Melisandre Davos are talking about Shireen. Brienne comes and interrupts them. This is actually a nod to a device George uses himself quite a bit, which is something really interesting or important is being said, and an interruption happens before we get the full story. It's happened several times. There's some key ones where there's a history lesson being told that gets interrupted. Of course, that particularly annoys me, but in a good way. More like a dang it, George, you tease. So it's an interesting possibility that they were giving a bit of a nod there by using the interruptions as a device. But in any case, this conflict between Mel and Davos, I think, is interesting. I don't think that the conflict between Brienne and Mel and Davos is going to end in anything violent. It could cause some conflict, but I feel like since Sansa has Brienne sworn to her, and Mel has basically sworn herself to Jon, Davos is kind of like a Ronin right now. He's a masterless samurai of sorts, but he's pretty much. I think it's pretty likely he's going to align himself with this Stark cause. There's not much else for him to do, and he's just a good guy that wants to help out and wants to fight the others. So I don't see that they could have a major conflict between the two, given that they're pretty much on the same team now. What do you think, Lady Gwyn?
Well, I think you're probably right, but from a dramatic standpoint, there is a really interesting triangle emerging with the three of them, because they do all have reasons to strongly dislike each other, but as you said, here they find themselves all effectively fighting for the same cause, so there's a potential there for some at least very interesting dynamics between them.
Right on. And Davos can help Jon in a number of ways, like as a diplomat or getting other Northerners on his side, etc. That's something he's got experience with, working for Stannis. Brienne, it's possible she could do a similar sort of thing, but she doesn't have that kind of experience, and Northerners kind of look down on women fighters, so she might be better used in a different role, something to help Sansa, maybe just being a bodyguard or heading south. Maybe we've guessed that she might be sent out to continue looking for Arya. Who knows? But it's possible that, given this potential conflict between these helper characters, they might be separated. Sansa and Jon might be like, we gotta separate Davos and Brienne from each other. Let's send them in different directions so they don't keep fighting each other or what have you. Now, Melisandre, how she can help Jon is a much bigger question. Now, watching her, Ben J wonders if she could send a shadow baby to help Rickon with Jon's help, providing the shadow baby batter, so to speak. Now, yeah, that was gross. But there's a bit of a hint of this happening in the past, right? With Melisandre asking Jon if he's a virgin. Like, that never went anywhere, right? That was just a weird question that came in. We're like, what the hell is that all about? But I think that might have been what the hell that was all about, was setting up the possibility of shadow babies. And in the books, Mel thinks of how the Wall would make any shadow she makes extremely powerful. She says, such shadows that I unleash here, no one can stand against them. So I feel we haven't seen the last of the shadow babies in the books, and I think there's also a strong chance that's true for the show. Nothing has given me any sense that this will happen this season. I haven't seen anything that points me in that direction. It's just the stuff that happened last season plus the books. So don't really have any evidence for it, but I think there's a strong chance. It's just a really cool thing, and yeah, shadow babies, hey, let's have more of that, right? See what they're all about. Okay, so let's a brief chat about Brienne and Tormund. Bearmont? Yeah, I got my Tormund shirt on today and his Argyle sweater, looking fierce and well dressed, of course. Yolkboy, what did you think of this scene? Or this interaction in general?
I loved this scene. I know that a lot of watchers really liked it too. It was such a nice surprise, and it was very amusing. It was actually my favourite moment from the episode, I think, especially when the shot of Ed's face when he saw Tormund trying to do his flirting with Brienne. It was just so funny. It was played well. I laughed out loud. And after all the smiles between Sansa and Jon earlier, this was another kind of great relief, and this more of a comical moment too, but another kind of relief moment, given all the darkness that's been running through the show for like the last season. I thought it was great to have these lighter moments at last, and I also thought that Ed was really well acted, like I said, and a shout out to the actor who we never mention. He's called Ben Crompton. I've got to say that he is a brilliant Dolores Ed. I really love the way he plays him. He looks the part. He acts the part.
Totally agree. And I thought it's funny that people are talking about this flirtatiousness, and it seems kind of one-sided though, doesn't it? I mean, the look, Tormund gives Brienne the look, and Brienne reaches for her sword. That's the first interaction they have. And then at dinner, he's doing his like sexy chicken eating thing, and she's just kind of, her facial acting was really hilarious too. She's just like, okay then, kind of looks down at her food and is like, well, yeah, that's gross too. Everything is gross. And yeah, that was what I was referring to with my intro spiel about the brilliant, comedic acting without any dialogue, just great facial acting. So that's another thing that a TV show can do that a book can't do. So props to the show there, props to the actors, all very good work all around. Okay, we're going to take a quick ad break. We'll be back to talk about the Pink Letter. Exciting. We were expecting to see this in the show, some version of it, and I wasn't disappointed. We'll be back to discuss it more in detail in just a sec. Okay, the Pink Letter. Compare and contrast. We're not going to read each individual version of it. The show version is pretty similar. In a way, the threat that Ramsay puts in the letter, okay, assuming Ramsay wrote the letter, let's just assume Ramsay wrote the letter. That's a whole different debate. Just compare the two as if Ramsay wrote them both. Because even if the book one wasn't written by Ramsay, it was meant to seem like it came from Ramsay, so we can still compare it on those grounds. The big difference is the teeth that the threat has. In the book, it's a pretty powerful threat, but it's just Mance Rayder as a captive, and it's the threat of what he's going to do to Jon and the Wildlings and the Watch, not what he's going to do to Mance Rayder. Jon isn't terribly concerned about Mance Rayder, probably. But in the show, it's Rickon. That's a much more powerful threat, and Sansa doesn't have any doubts that he's telling the truth. That's something that Jon was like, well, this is just a letter, maybe it's a lie, and of course that's what Tormund says in the book. So that's a nod there to, well, this is just writing. I could write whatever I wanted. Just make it true. So, Lady Gwyn, tell us what you thought about this version of the letter.
Well, along the lines of what I mentioned about Jon's sort of tender thoughts of Sansa, in the book, the Pink Letter gives him all these sort of warm, fuzzy thoughts about his siblings, especially Arya, who, he reads this letter and he thinks that Arya's been married off to Ramsay by the Lannisters. It's important to remember, even though the letter says, I have Mance captive, it also makes clear that Arya's kind of among the missing. So there is a certain level of anxiety, I think, on Jon's part as far as what's happened with his little sister. He could very well be afraid that Ramsay is going to find her if he doesn't act. I have a passage here of what exactly he thinks after he reads the letter that leads him right into the decision. It says, he thought of Robb with snowflakes melting in his hair. Kill the boy and let the man be born. He thought of Bran clambering up a tower wall, agile as a monkey, of Rickon's breathless laughter, of Sansa brushing out Lady's coat and singing to herself. You know nothing, Jon Snow. He thought of Arya, her hair as tangled as a bird's nest. I've made him a warm cloak from the skin of the 6 whores who came with him to Winterfell. I want my bride back. I want my bride back. I want my bride back. So, of course, the letter doesn't repeat that 3 times, but I think the repetition of that phrase in Jon's point of view underscores his anxiety about Arya. He also mentions Mance, and I think that is how he arrived at that "we're coming for you, bastard." That he's something we've mentioned a few times, and I think we all hoped the show would give us, and basically it has. Not exactly those words, but here we go.
And that's something that both show and book have done here, and it harkens back to how much Jon is like Ned, even though we're all pretty sold on the fact that no matter which version of, even if you don't believe in R+L=J, which we're all sold on, no one very few people out there believe that Ned is actually Jon's father, sire, but he raised him. That makes him his father, whether he's his sire or not. And Ned and Jon have a lot in common, whether he's his sire or not. That's just very clear, and this is a perfect example of that. Jon, just like Ned, puts duty first unless family is involved. And once family is involved, that becomes the higher priority. And just like Ned was willing to sacrifice his honor and falsely accuse himself or admit that he, schemed against the true king, and he did it to save Sansa. Jon, questionably breaking his Night's Watch vows to go save his family from the night, as a member of the Night's Watch. And of course, in the very beginning, Jon runs off before Jeor forgives him for running off. He runs off when he hears about what's happened to his father at the beginning or at the end of Game of Thrones. So a lot of neat parallels there between Jon's actions and Ned's actions and the motivation for those actions, which I think is really nicely done. Both show and book have done that well so far. All right, let's move a bit south to the instigator of all this, Ramsay and Osha. We get a very classic villain posture there of the old apple peeling there. I think that's probably on TV tropes, the villain eating the apple, peeling the apple slowly. It's just a sinister kind of thing to do. Now, throughout this episode, of course, we're going to bring up the underestimation and misdirection theme, which is going on a lot. And in this case, Osha kind of underestimated Ramsay a little bit, though, to be fair, she was pretty much seizing what was probably her only opportunity. She wasn't like, well, I'll wait for a better chance to stab him, rather than when she's sitting in his lap. That doesn't really get much better than that, does it? But really, Ramsay set her up. She thought he wanted sex from her because he had her bathed. She says this. But no, it was sport for him. He didn't need info from her. He didn't want to sleep with her. He didn't want to torture her, apparently, which I guess we can be thankful for that, I guess. But, yeah, it was kind of sad to see her exit stage left so quickly. She didn't really get much screen time after vanishing with Rickon so long ago. I'm guessing Book Ramsay would have done this a bit differently. But will Book Ramsay be faced with the situation at all? Probably not. I don't think. It's no sure thing that Book Ramsay will ever even be Lord Bolton. I mean, let alone capturing Osha and Rickon. So I don't know that we'll get a version of this. What did you guys think about this scene? It was kind of quick. I don't know that it advanced the plot much. It told us a few things, but it's kind of just Ramsay being Ramsay, huh?
Yeah, to be honest, Aziz, I've been suffering from Ramsay fatigue for what seems like a long time now. He seems to be in just about every episode, and I just can't really wait for him to die. I found Joffrey to be a really captivating, dynamic, and interesting villain, but I really don't have the same kind of feeling of loving to hate this villain Ramsay. I just kind of hate him. I think he kind of makes the show unbearable at times, and I really can't wait for him to be out of the show for good.
I think it'll be this season. I don't think he lasts the season. I really hope that's the case. It'll be satisfying, but maybe not. Maybe he'll linger a bit longer. Maybe he'll die early next season. But can anyone actually see him being part of the fight against the White Walkers, being part of that? I don't know. It doesn't seem likely. And for that reason, I have other people on the chopping block, but we'll speak to that later. Lady Gwyn, what about your thoughts on this scene?
So this scene, I got to tell you, I couldn't even rewatch it because I'm sharing that Ramsay fatigue. I really like Natalia, and so did George. So given that sort of dialogue that had gone on around that, where he's going to give her a bigger role in the books now because he liked so much what Natalia did with the character. I thought maybe bringing her back was a hint that we'd get to see a little more of her. So it's disappointing. In hindsight, the scene was really well set up. Like you said, he totally set her up. He put the knife right there. He knew exactly what she was going to do all along. I absolutely should have seen it coming. But I'm just so tired of him winning. And this barrage of atrocities is having like an opposite effect because I have to tune it out. So, I guess in the end it might be all better when he dies. But I think at this point I'm just going to feel relief instead of happiness. So, but beyond death, I hope, beyond him dying, which I certainly hope is this season or early next at the latest, I do hope that there's something incredibly karmic coming for him, and that will kind of redeem this storyline. I hope we see the results of his arrogance. Otherwise, all of this is going to kind of seem gratuitous.
Yeah, and of course the show does, verge into gratuitous territory from time to time, perhaps often, although less so this season, I suppose. But yeah, I think one of the things with Ramsay is he's a bad guy, but he hasn't done a lot of things that you would think make him a formidable villain, other than that he's dangerous and violent. But he hasn't outthought anyone for the most part. His father. We've talked about how Roose in the books probably won't be so easy to take out. And yeah, so I don't know, Ramsay. I'm kind of with you guys. I like the actor a lot, and I think that the storyline is solid. But indeed, they probably have put a little too much Ramsay on screen. But we'll see what happens. Now, Watcher Tatenda points out that in the Umber Rickon scene from episode 3, there's the flayed man carved into the fireplace a bunch of times. It's like a mural in the fireplace. Maybe a little bit of hint of foreshadowing there. Ramsay does seem to be driving his own house into the flames, in a sense. So maybe we'll see that happen sooner rather than later. Okay, so let's move. We're going to move on to the Vale, but first I will give a quick shout out to our Patreon sellsword captains. Starting with Peter Blaze of the Emerald Isle, captain of the Werewood Wanderers, to long lives, quick deaths, cold beer, and warm women. That's their motto. Dagron, Marshal of the Axe, is captain of the Red Tide. Their motto is resistance is futile. Garion Pike is wielder of Grave Embrace of Valyrian Steel Axe, and captain of the Iron Wave. Iron's Kiss is eternal. Captain Darton is captain of the Mother's Men. Kyron Callsbane is captain of the Stone Shields. The torrent breaks upon the stone. Captain Kithik Deadeye is our newest member of the group. He is of the Scarlet Longbows, and their motto is pierced by darkness. Also added a new Patreon title for people who want to designate themselves as Ironborn captains. You can sign up there, name your own ship, and have fun with that. Check us out at historyofwesteros.com. Patreon links on the right sidebar there. Okay, back to it. Let's talk about the Vale. There's some more dialogue-free humor right at the start. Robert Aaron doing all sorts of funny faces as he's trying to sight the ball. I bet that kid we're supposed to think he has weak eyesight, perhaps, the way he just kind of closes his eye, opens it, moves his head out. It's like he's having trouble seeing the target, but it was pretty funny anyway around. It's not our first time seeing Robert Aaron be incredibly inept at something to do with weapons or just inept in general. But more important is the fact that despite the terrible shot, there's an underlying theme here. Robert looks at Bronze Jan Royce for approval after shooting this terrible shot, which he gets in the form of a forced smile. Now, to me, this is meant to remind us of who this boy Lord really is and what defines him. He basically has no parents, and the upbringing he did have from the one parent who was around for a little while was pretty terrible. His need for approval, combined with being badly spoiled, and the perils of those things in proximity to an expert manipulator with great ambition, Littlefinger, of course. Littlefinger has him completely and utterly in his grasp, and he completely and utterly outmaneuvers Bronze Jan Royce using that, control over Robert Aaron. So, Lady Gwyn, what about you? What do you think of this scene?
I thought it was a pretty solid scene. I did think it was absolutely hilarious when Sweet Robin said, "Throw him out the moon door." And I literally stopped and went, I looked, and you could see mountains in the distance, and I assume the Erie is up there somewhere. I was like, so are the guards supposed to just start walking? Get him up? I just thought that was funny. And but it just it highlights the kid's kind of tenuous grip on reality, doesn't it? Combined with all the things you mentioned about him.
Yeah, he does seem to have his head in the clouds.
Nice.
Yeah, I was going to say that last time Littlefinger met Sweet Robin on screen was when Sansa came to the Eyrie, I think, and Littlefinger gave him a small crystal falcon, if you remember. So Robert is obviously very easy to win over, being the spoiled child that you described, Aziz. And this time he kind of upgrades the gift, doesn't he, and gives him a real falcon to his glee. Robert must be one of the easiest chess pieces to maneuver in Littlefinger's entire game.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting, too, that the real falcon, him giving him a falcon, is sort of symbolic of him controlling Robert, because it's the falcon is the sigil of House Aaron, but it's Littlefinger who's providing him the actual animal. I think that's kind of interesting. It kind of shows how he subverted House Aaron in a lot of ways. Now, so we're getting what we expected. The Vale Knights are heading north. This is an opportunity, perhaps, for maybe Ramsay to do something intelligent and see this coming and maybe prevent them from coming. But I don't think that's going to happen, because they probably aren't going to ride up through the neck, which would be where he could stop them. I think they're going to go by ship. I don't know why. I'm basically just guessing that, though, because Littlefinger's, or they'll use Littlefinger's teleporter, which maybe have been outfitted for an entire army. But we'll just have to see how that pans out. So Bronzion learns the hard way. The man who rules the king rules the kingdom. Now, Robert Aaron is no king. The point is the same, right? So let's head to where another weak ruler is being manipulated. Instead of Littlefinger having Robert Aaron all to himself, this is different in King's Landing, because quite a few people are trying to influence King Tommen. Lion Claws, Rose Thorns, and Sparrow Talons are ripping the poor kid in many directions at once. Yeah. So King's Landing, a lot happening here, really clever things happening here, subtext, underlying themes, plots within plots. This is one of my favorite parts of the episode, because there's sneaky things happening, and I think I've figured some of it out. I think we've, together as a group, figured some of these other things out, and I'm curious to see if we're right. So let's talk about them. Marjorie and the High Sparrow, this seems to be kind of going along sort of the way we expected, but with a little twist. He keeps trying to win her over. That's kind of what we expected. Maybe trying to rule through her a little bit, just kind of like he's trying to rule through Tommen. And while he ignores Jaime, because Jaime isn't a path to controlling Jaime is both not going to happen and not really a path to power. So Marjorie's playing along a bit. She seems to encourage him to tell his story, but we see from the next scene when she's with Loras that she's not fooled. She sees that she kind of understands his game, or at least realizes that he's playing a game, and wants to try to do what she can. In the books, this is different because we just don't have much insight into Marjorie's ordeal. She's not a POV. She's not on screen as much. She's younger. We presume that because she's younger, that she's a bit more naive, maybe not as strong a player as Show Marjorie is, though not without some skills. But this Marjorie and Loras scene is where a lot of this comes out. Yolkboy, what did you think of Marjorie and Loras? It was kind of surprising to see Loras so just given up there, huh?
Yeah, Marjorie, who we thought was really beaten down, seems to have some more inner fortitude, doesn't she? A lot more than Loras at this point. She tried to convince Loras that they've got a chance. You know, she's grabbing hold of hope, which he just doesn't have. But he just wants her to do whatever it takes to make his situation stop. He's got no fight left in him whatsoever, and all he wants is for it to end. He is truly broken at this point.
So what does it mean when he says he wants it to end? Does he mean he wants to be put out of his misery? Does he want to die? Or is he just that hopeless that he just is just asking for it to end in any way possible? And along those lines, has he been tortured? We can't really answer those questions. We can, you guys can give your opinions, but those are questions I have that we don't really know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Whether he's been tortured, or whether he's actually wants to die, or is it just is it not clear?
I thought, I got the impression that he's probably been tortured, physically, possibly, definitely emotionally. Another thing that I think was really clear in this scene was the highlight of female power, because we saw over and over again the women, Sansa and Yara and Marjorie, and of course culminating with Dany, really stepping forward and owning things, and men kind of stepping back and on a sliding scale of kind of not being present. for various reasons, but I just thought this was an interesting continuation of that theme here.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess we'll have to wait and see. There wasn't any obvious signs of torture, but the way he acted made me really think of, geez, he's been deprived at the very least. Maybe he isn't. It seems like whatever they're doing to him is more severe than what's been done to Marjorie, which makes sense, I suppose, given the severity of their relative crimes according to the faith, anyway. Marjorie's only guilty of lying about what Loras did, where Loras is actually guilty of what he did, which I don't suppose we would recognize as a crime, but the High Sparrow certainly does, and he's in charge, so that's that. Tommen and Cersei and Pycelle is where we're going next. This is an interesting scene. On Monday, Sean, our show reviewer, talked about the interesting camera work in the scene, how clever it was. Now we have Pycelle warning Tommen about how precarious the situation is. He warns against antagonizing them, which later is exactly what Cersei and Jaime plan on doing, in which Olenna and Kevin go along with. So it's funny because we have this important, prophetic line delivered by a character that everyone just despises. They think Pycelle is this doddering old, creepy old man that he's kind of he's past his prime. He's a bit of a whiner, and he seems a bit spineless. But I think he's right. I think he's 100% right. And Cersei is completely dismissive of this, though. And Tommen seems to agree, though he is he agrees with Pycelle to a certain degree, though he's not really concerned about blood in the streets and civil war. He's more worried about Marjorie. And from a little kid's perspective, that makes some sense, but really the big picture is what Pycelle is pointing to. And again, I think he's totally right. We'll see, and we'll explain this in a bit more detail here. A couple of different possibilities for what is happening. Tommen trembles a bit as he prepares to tell his mother something big, but we don't hear it, which leaves room for doubt. Part of the cleverness of this scene, giving us multiple options. I think a lot of people immediately suspected trickery, like, well, maybe Cersei isn't saying what Tommen said. And that's where my head went first. But upon reflection, I had a different idea. So let's explain these ideas. There's two of them. Basically it revolves on who is actually doing the tricking, whether it's Cersei or whether it's somebody else. They stem from what might have been said by Tommen. Yolkboy, take us away. Break down these theories for us.
Okay, first of all, before we talk about the possible trickery, there's always the possibility that there's no tricking, that
yes,
Marjorie is being set up for a walk of shame, and Cersei is joining forces with the Tyrells, and everything is as it appears. But as Aziz said, there are two ideas of the trick going on, so let's look at those. First of all, Cersei could be tricking the Tyrells into fighting against the faith in order to damage both parties. That means that Tommen never actually mentioned there's a walk of shame for Marjorie lined up, and it's a Cersei invention. This seems to be a plausible idea, and Cersei would.
Let me jump in just for a second. Because if you guys remember, the way it's spelled out is Kevin is ordered to stand down while the Tyrell army comes in to do the dirty work. So it could look like the Lannisters aren't involved. They're like, hey, we didn't do that, and all the blame falls on the Tyrells. So that's why that looks that way. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Yolkboy.
No, this seems like a plausible idea, doesn't it? And Cersei would have good motives to want both sides diminished. But someone on Reddit takes it a step further and suggests that Tommen found out from the High Sparrow about Joffrey's death being at the hands of the Tyrells. And that's what he told Cersei. And now she wants immediate revenge. And while I think it's an interesting idea, it might be a little bit too complex for the show, I think. I don't know if they can manage that kind of line of conspiracy. But anyway, it's a really good idea. And the other idea, and this is one that Aziz has been talking to me about, is that the High Sparrow is baiting Cersei and Olenna and all of them together. The High Sparrow is leaking information to Tommen because he knows that he's going to tell his mother. And so the High Sparrow can play them all like pawns in a way. Is it really plausible that the High Sparrow expected Tommen to keep a really big secret from his mother after what he's recognized about the love of those two? That Marjorie the Queen has to do a walk of shame? And isn't sharing secrets with someone one of the most classic and obvious tricks used by kind of con men and the like to gain trust? doesn't Tommen seem like a really obvious candidate for manipulation with these kind of secrets and so on?
Yes, I think the answer to all those questions is a resounding yes. Tommen is easily manipulated. There's almost no way in my mind the High Sparrow would think that Tommen would actually keep that secret after watching his own mother go through that same treatment. And why would he want to keep that a secret? Only for some reason, only for something like this. Like I don't know. I like the idea for many reasons, such as how well it fits in this theme too. It's contempt-based underestimation of one's enemies, a very strong theme of this episode. Cersei speaks to the small council in this manner. She says, "You all hate these fanatics as much as I do," and referring to the High Sparrow's dirty peasant hands. You know, contempt is a familiar display coming from Cersei, so it works really well, even if it's fake or not. We're all just very familiar with Cersei being contemptuous and underestimating people. Olenna falling for this, though, really sells it to us as an audience because we expect her to be more cunning, and we don't expect her to fall into a trap. But even whichever of these theories you prefer, she's falling for one of them. Either Cersei's manipulated her successfully, or High Sparrow has. Either way, she seems to have taken the bait. So it's funny, again, we come back to Pycelle.
Yeah. Ironically, Pycelle is the one who's giving the best advice. Don't antagonize them. But since he's repeating it to Tommen in that private scene, it probably means that no one's really listening to him in the small council. So Marjorie might be the only one who can see the depths of the High Sparrow scheming, but there's no one that can listen to her. And we kind of wonder if her warning or her views might be similar to Pycelle's.
That's
yeah, it could be. So, you know, Pycelle says don't antagonize them, and then they go ahead and plan to do exactly the opposite of what he says. Tyrell army marching into the city, kind of antagonistic, wouldn't you say?
Very, very much so. Even if Mace Tyrell is leading that army looking all silly, he'll still look antagonistic. So, what is this? Again, as a book reader's show here, what does all this tell us about what's coming in the Winds of Winter? Well, the book High Sparrow is less subtle, but very cunning still, and far bloodier, frankly, which is, you know, the book and show sometimes compete with each other to be bloodier and more brutal, but definitely the book High Sparrow is more bloody. He's won that title so far. It's possible that the Faith's ultimate role in A Song of Ice and Fire will be more related to the Aegon VI plot or Daenerys and her landing rather than the Tyrell Lannister alliance, although it could involve all those things. The Faith is too big a faction to not play multiple roles like that. To me, I think that what might really be a problem is if Dany has a horde of R'hllorist followers that believe she's Azor Ahai, and they show up in Westeros, and then you have two different groups of fanatics just on the same continent who all believe in very strongly in, well, they're zealots. You don't have to really go any farther than that. So that could be bad. Faith Militant versus R'hllorists, and then you have all these Dothraki. I don't suppose the Faith Militant are going to be happy with Dothraki savages. That's probably what they would call them, right? So, I mean, people don't even really like foreigners in Westeros, and these are the, you know, from their point of view, these are worse than foreigners. They're invading foreigners who worship a horse god, and, you know, there's just, you can just see the prejudice coming. So, now, Kevin sort of keeps his wits during all this, but is still convinced because, well, they play on his deepest fears. They talk about Lancel, and they sell this to him via his children. He's the only one that seems to have strong doubts, but the doubts aren't strong enough. He says, and this is the same for book Kevin too, which I think is interesting. Both book and show Kevin are extremely concerned about the potential for an all-out war between the Faith and the Crown, civil war in the streets, that sort of thing. Olenna dismisses this like, well, yeah, well, that's going to happen no matter what we do, but better them than us. So that's where this is headed. This is headed for major blood, major brutality, I think. And some version of the book I think will be similar. I think maybe the situation will be different, but the end result will be similar. Faith Militant getting bloody with one or more other factions. The Lannisters will be involved some way. Anyway, speaking of book Kevin, on the day the show premiered this season, I released an episode called Aziz versus Chapter, and it's that chapter that I break down. So if you want to hear more about Kevin, go check that out. Okay, and now we will take another short ad break. We'll be right back to move on to Essos. For those of you who listen regularly or watch regularly and don't And that ad, when I talk about an ad break and it just skips right to when I'm talking next, there isn't always an ad there, and sometimes some of you have ad blockers. So I just wanted to clear that up in case it's confusing. You're like, what break? That wasn't even a second. Well, that's that. Sometimes there'll be ads there, sometimes there won't. If you have ad blockers, well, there probably won't be one there ever. So that's that. Just wanted to explain that in case it was confusing. Okay, Essos. Lots happening in Essos, though we aren't as spread out. There was no Arya this time for the first time this season. Lots happening at Slaver's Bay. Tyrion meets with two important factions. Varys is completely silent the whole time. He's there, but he doesn't say anything. Missandei and Grey Worm, anything but silent. They have a lot to say. Like good teammates, they present a unified front to the delegations. They don't act like they don't act disorganized and disunited, which is an important thing. But once the other people are away, Grey Worm and Missandei bitterly challenge Tyrion on his decisions. Yolkboy, kind of break this down for us.
Okay, so here Tyrion plays the role of diplomat. I don't know if you've noticed, but he's almost like an acting hand, isn't he?
Yeah, it's very similar.
He is. He's fulfilling the role of an acting hand. And last week we saw Varys showing his skills as the new Master of Whisperers, even though I don't. So you can actually see the nucleus of a functioning government forming, can't we? With the Hand and the Master of Whisperers, it's starting to look a bit more like what King's Landing used to look like.
Yeah, good point.
It's often said that Dany is a better conqueror than ruler, and I think one of the main factors is that she wasn't set up to rule. She's inexperienced due to her age, and she conquered Slaver's Bay very quickly and suddenly without a really good plan for the long haul. She often acts on instinct, doesn't she? We see that time and again. She does amazing things for herself and her people in the short term, but it's not always so great in the long term. We're left to wonder how things would have panned out if Dany had had Tyrion and Varys acting like this in her corner from the very beginning in Meereen, as they both are clearly very adept at their governing roles.
Yeah, early on she had Missandei a bit, but Missandei doesn't have a lot of government experience either. And other than that, she just had a bunch of guys who were fighters. She had Jorah, she had Barristan, she had Grey Worm, and Daario. I mean, just guys who were first and foremost warriors. Those guys are not very helpful with ruling. They had some good advice here and there, but mostly, yeah. Varys, I almost said Varian and Tyrus. Varys and Tyrion are clearly on another level with that regard. Now, the argument itself between Grey Worm, Missandei, and Tyrion, almost said Tyrius again or something, slavery idealism versus slavery realism, you might say. But which side of the argument is which? At first, it's clear, based on how it's presented, it's clear that Tyrion is the realistic one and Missandei and Grey Worm are the idealistic ones. But when Grey Worm tells Tyrion that they will use him, meaning the Masters, not the other way around, it makes you think, it made me think anyway, maybe he and Missandei are right, that peace and diplomacy are not actually realistic here. And so maybe Tyrion is being idealistic, thinking that he can work with or even manipulate the slavers at all. They're too good at that, or they're going to be the ones to play you. Does Tyrion really think they won't take any opportunity they can to restore slavery?
Well, maybe he does. I mean, despite the apparent flimsiness of the arrangement, it does strike us that Tyrion has basically given them nothing. He threatened them, despite the gifts of the girls and gentle language, offered them threats. He said they wouldn't get a better offer, and the alternative is clear, despite being unsaid. Agree to this or die.
Yeah, if it's not the Unsullied, Watchner Leo suggests Tyrion could send the dragons at them. I don't know if he could learn to do that, but sending the Unsullied would be fearsome enough. So in that sense, it's quite clever. Tyrion is demanding something but offering nothing. So anything the slavers give him, whether he gives them time, whether they actually cut off some or all their support to the Sons of the Harpy, it's a win. And all he gave them was talk. Yeah? So that's actually, maybe he doesn't. That's kind of the angle I like there. And Grey Worm doesn't think it will be so easy, though. Grey Worm thinks, no, you're giving them rope. Don't give them rope. Don't even try to play with them. So this pairing of compromise and underestimation of one's enemies due to contempt, that recurring theme I keep harping on, makes this scene, it's like the thematic crux of the episode, because both of these things are present, but we don't know who is on which side of it. Who is underestimating who? Is Tyrion underestimating the slavers, or are they underestimating him? Grey Worm is saying, no, you're underestimating them, and Tyrion maybe it gives him second thoughts. Maybe he's thinking maybe Grey Worm is a point there. Elsewhere in the episode, it's always clear who is doing the underestimating and who isn't. But here, we don't know. So that's really cool. In this scene, it's foggy, and you can see it both ways. Both sides make sense, so we're just going to have to wait. Meanwhile, the one they're all waiting on is up north, being underestimated and using it against her enemies. But there's no compromise in Dany's case. She only needed a little help from her friends, her existing ones who were hunting for her, and a new one, the young Khaleesi she won over to her cause. So, of course, well, before we get to Dany, though, we have Jorah and Daario, who are the friends that she needed a little help from. There's not maybe a whole lot to say here, except for the grayscale thing. Daario's not in a position to do much about it. At the time he notices it, a few people were wondering why he didn't have a stronger reaction to it, such as our own Patreon Lord Commander George the Golden, wondering about Daario's lack of fear there. To me, I had to think about it a minute, but I think it's just Daario being Daario. Nothing much bothers him or threatens him. He's cocky that way. And at the moment, he was probably more, as intimidating as Grayscale is, was taking off his weapons at the moment he saw that, about to walk into Vace Dothrak unarmed, facing 100,000 Dothraki. So I don't know that he could have been any more intimidated than he already was. He's it's like, oh, Grayscale, whatever. Besides, he knows that it's going to come up. Dany's going to be the one that is going to have to deal with that. He's going to tell her. Jorah's going to have to spill the beans. It's kind of a underlying, something's going to happen there. That Grayscale can't be hidden anymore. But so we still have no idea how this is going to play out. I really am curious. We've been talking about the Grayscale almost every episode. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? Well, we're still waiting. Right now, it seems like what if a Grayscale epidemic hits the Khalasar? This gigantic Khalasar Dany has just formed. Well, that's kind of terrifying. Now, another aspect of this whole scene, unlike Loras or Jon, who seemingly lost the will to fight while a female family member is rallying them, trying to stir them up, Jorah and Daario, well, they haven't given up, certainly. They certainly are fighting. They're trying. But Jorah already knows he's dying. To him, this is almost a suicide mission. The way he said, Dany's like, what are you doing here? We'll never get out of here. And he's like, well, we can only die trying. Something to that effect. It's not quitting, it's not giving up, but it's fatalistic. It's expecting to die. It's expecting that you're taking an extreme long shot chance at something that you don't really expect to succeed at. Daario, again, is cocky enough to maybe think that he might succeed here, but yeah, I don't know about. And other than that, it's kind of hard to say. So, yeah, yolkboy, what did you think?
Well, I was just wondering about Jorah. It really shows Jorah's complete love and conviction to Dany here, doesn't it? He knows he can't ever be with Dany. Now he's got this grayscale, yet he still cares about her welfare above all else. I think this actually speaks well for his character on the TV show, although perhaps you could say that his obsession is still a little bit over the top.
Yeah. What about you, Lady Gwyn? What did you think about this Jorah and Daario business here?
Well, I really like Jorah. Pardon me while I scroll down to find my notes.
Yeah, we lost you for a second there, but you're back in.
I lost everything. All right. But I really like the way that Jorah refused to rise to Daario's bait. Daario keeps trying to, needle him about Dany choosing him, but Jorah really just kept focused on the goal. He acted like an adult. I want to say that I like Jorah more and more every season, which has to be a testament to the showrunners and Ian Glenn in particular, because by this time, book Jorah is pretty much insufferable, and I really can't stand him. So that's a plus for the show.
So they show up with their desperate plan, and roughly along the lines of the theme, Dany takes charge with a much better, more effective plan, far more audacious, much more epic. So here we are, Vaes Dothrak with Dush Khaleen. Dany has never really been big on compromise in the first place, which we were talking about how compromise is a big part of this episode. This is where that compromise just falls by the wayside. There's no compromise here. And that's a pretty good fit as it pertains to the Dothraki. They're not exactly big on compromise as a society either. They're ruled by strength. And holy crap, does Dany look strong now, right? Like, Lady Gwyn, check up all the boxes of strength here that Dany has displayed.
Well, cows are often made by killing. If not killing cows, then killing others. But she killed them all the cows. Bye-bye.
21 of them apparently. We saw that in the behind the episode. Or if it was 21 calls, or there were 21 guys in that room if they weren't all calls. So
right. So they're all gone now. She already had a reputation as the mother of dragons. We saw that reputation preceded her. Some may have seen it as a rumor, but she confirmed it by repeating that whole mother of dragons unburnt thing in this grand epic fashion. So as previously mentioned, it's a society of horsemen, and people with the best mounts are tend to be the strongest people, as mounts are really prized, and you really can't beat hers. So she didn't even have to use them.
Yeah.
Defeat all those cows. So.
And that was one of the bigger surprises, because I think we all, as we said last week, this plot line lacked a bit of tension because we know Dany's going to come out of it well. But that said, we were surprised with how it went down, because the how was much different than what we expected. I think almost everyone thought Drogon was going to be a part of this, and he was going to be the one to save her, to be the main vehicle for her dominating the Dothraki. And in a scene full of surprises, this was possibly the biggest part of that surprise. We're all, even at the last second, I was like, wait, where is Drogon? How's he going to... Isn't it kind of late for Drogon to appear now? And then she dips the brazier, and well, that's that. Drogon is not involved. So that was pretty cool. Like Lady Gwyn pointed out, Dany's reputation and who she was preceded her. The Lazarine Call asked, "Do you really have 3 dragons?" So everyone seems to know that, and why wouldn't they know that? Well, it's a huge deal, and it's happened years ago. News would have spread about that. Dragons being reborn in the world. That's going to get around, even out to the Dothraki Sea. So, one of Dany's ancestors drank wildfire. Her father was in love with fire, but it's Dany who seems to be mastering it here. Or at least, well, it doesn't hurt her. What we just saw there is a confirmation in show canon that I fully expect to be book canon as well, not the fire burning thing, not the immunity to fire thing, that Dany, not Rhaego, is the stallion who mounts the world. Yolkboy, tell us about that.
Yeah, I think that in the books we should be careful what we kind of canonize and stuff. But it probably happens a lot differently. We all think, but obviously there are going to be some similarities there. I've got the line from the great moment in the House of the Undying. Beneath the mother of mountains, a line of naked crones crept from a great lake and knelt shivering before her, their grey heads bowed. So yeah, we can see the crones. They're coming out of a lake, which always I wondered if that was because there was a fire. I never obviously thought what was to happen. I never envisaged Dany was going to burn the Temple of Dush Khaleen, but I wondered why they were coming out of the lake. It did cross my mind that, maybe they go to the lake because the place is on fire. In general, I'm really waiting for the books before, forming my opinion of how this went down. But here, the result will most likely be very, very similar. And as a plot point, it's all about Dany having a united Khalasar at her back. That's the whole purpose of this, and I'm sure that's going to be the same.
Yeah, like we didn't get them emerging from a great lake and shivering, but they certainly knelt before her, and it was not just the crones, but a lot of Dothraki, huge numbers of them, and we got to see, it was clever, I thought, the way they shot the scene. You got to see a variety of different Dothraki kneeling. You got to see the old Dashkaline woman, the young one that helped Dany out, and a couple of warriors. You saw, like, the bearded guys with their Dothraki accoutrement. So it was kind of nice. They showed, like, the smattering of different people there. Last episode, the wildlings are said to see Jon as a god, and now Dany is being seen that way as well. I think Yolkboy, I think you called that in advance. I think that was you, right?
Yeah.
Lady Gwyn.
I'm glad I got something.
Yeah, pat yourself in the back for that one. Good job. Good job. Now, Lady Gwyn, you have some interesting feedback from a listener/watcher.
Yes. Casey Wade on Twitter asks a question about Quait's prophecy. Are we seeing to go forward, you must go back coming true? And there has been a lot of that discussion that I've seen around the last couple of days. I think we pretty much all agree that this is likely a thematic nod to something that happens in the books. I don't think Quaith actually says that in the show, but she certainly does in the book, so we can see that there, if this show scene is mirroring where the books are going, that's kind of
right.
the answer to that.
So as usual, it's the details that are different in the show. They get to the same point often that the book does. Of course, there are exceptions to that. It's such a big story with so many parts. Obviously, some of it's going to have to change, but as we've been saying for years now, they tend to get to the same place, even if they take a much, much different route getting there. Where one of those major details diverges is, of course, the fire immunity thing. So that's clearly not book canon, the opposite of, and that has caused a bit of consternation, maybe more than a bit of consternation amongst the book fandom. Yolkboy, tell us about that.
Yeah, this goes back to 1999, an interview online with a fan group and George R.R. Martin, who asked him, do Targaryens become immune to fire once they bond to their dragons? And George's response was very clear. Thanks for asking that. It gives me a chance to clear up a common misconception. In capitals, Targaryens are not immune to fire! Exclamation mark. He says, the birth of Dany's dragons was unique, magical, wonderous, a miracle. She is called the Unburnt because she walked into the flames and lived. But her brother sure as hell wasn't immune to that molten gold. And so that's from a George interview, but let's take a look at the books, because most people have caught this, but some people don't realize this. In A Dance with Dragons, after Daznak's pit, when she's in the Dothraki Sea, it says, Dany, starved, slid off Drogon's back and ate with him, ripping chunks of smoking meat from the dead horse with bare, burned hands.
Yeah, I can't say I love the fire immunity. It's a little too high magic for me, but I didn't hate it either. And to be fair, the show set this up a long time ago, before the dragons were born even. In Season 1, Dany picked up one of the dragon eggs that was sitting on hot coals. Her handmaid saw, panicked, grabbed it from her. Result, handmaiden burnt, Dany not. And I think they didn't want to just have her dragon birthing scene on fire immunity come out of nowhere, so they set that up, and it's still set up many years later. So I guess they just didn't want that to come from nowhere. In the book, of course, we get her inner monologue, which drives her into the flames, which tells her she's the mother of dragons and all that goodness. I can get behind it, though. After all, in a sense, it would be weirder for her to have been immune to fire only once. That, to me, George has made that his canon, and that's fine with me. But in a sense, that's actually weirder, that it only worked once. But, again, that's fine. I like that. I wonder if I like George's version simply because I was introduced to it more, or first, rather. But, I can go with either way. It's again, it's a detail. It's not a plot point. It's not a major thing that's going to define the series from now on, or even at all, really.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The fandom was really divided by this whole scene. I think that the non-book readers absolutely loved it in general, but it's the book readers who are more split. We actually ran a poll on the Radio Westeros Twitter, to see what people thought of the scene in general. 28% of people loved it, 29% liked it, 22% thought it was average, and 21% hated it. So
wow, that's really balanced.
that's pretty balanced as far as polls go. You never usually get a poll like that that is that close that we've done on Twitter. I'll give my personal opinion. As a book reader, I found the fireproofness a bit jarring to watch. And I think even aside from the book reader aspect, I've been buried in the books, I can't help that. But even so, I still don't think I liked it all that much. My take is that it's a plot gift too far for Dany. Like Aziz said earlier, it's a little bit too high magic for me and my personal tastes. I do understand a lot of people loved it, and I don't want to, take anything away. I understand why they loved it. This has nothing to do with the Carls being kings and king's blood, by the way, because there was no king's blood when she picked up those hot eggs in season 1 that Aziz was talking about. There's no king's blood there. It's not another kind of magic miracle. Dany in TV show canon seems to be fireproof all the time, and like I said, to me, it's a bit too much of a superpower that's beyond something like the magic we see in warging and dragon riding. It's just a little step too far for me personally.
Yeah, I agree with the fact that the event was set up and show Dany is definitely not book Dany, but I just agree that this is kind of a superpower that doesn't have a real basis in the Game of Thrones world. So it felt a little weird, but that said, it was certainly a powerful scene. It was very well produced, and in retrospect, I'm glad that it was Dany on her own and not Drogon just swooping in and saving the day again, which I have to admit is pretty much what I expected as well. So.
Yeah, that would have just been a repeat of Daznak's pit, basically, and yeah, that would have been. So I don't, as much as we dislike the fire immunity, kind of all three of us seem to not be happy with it. It at least accomplished several things, which was that we were surprised, and that it wasn't repeating an earlier Deus Ex Drogana, and yeah, so it does have some pluses, even despite the fact that it was jarring for us. So yeah, so it's not so bad. Now, some people had a problem with how fast the fire spread. At first, I felt similarly, but this is one of the things I changed my mind upon after further reflection. There are numerous ways to explain it. First of all, the young Khaleesi and/or Jorah and Dario may have oiled the floor a bit. I think out of those three, it's much more likely to be the young Khaleesi because she would have a reason to be in there. It would be normal for her to be in there. That could be it. The braziers may have been filled with oil. Upending them would indeed spread the fire wherever the oil went, quickly and suddenly. Nothing implausible about well-stocked braziers in a sacred temple. That's pretty standard. A lot of temples have their, they never want the light to go out. Just permanent fires burning all the time. That's kind of a common thing, sort of. Furthermore, the roof of the building is straw, dry as bone straw, so it would definitely go up really fast. To be fair, I do think the roof supports came down a little too quickly. It was almost instantaneous. So, but I'm also not a structural engineer, so and it's kind of nitpicky in any case. So we'll move on from that. A bit of a nod in this earlier part of the scene, or before Dany even comes in, with the "fuck Aggo" line. Perhaps an inside joke of sorts related to one of Dany's blood riders, Aggo, not being in the show at all. They did originally have Ricardo, of course, but they killed him off, leaving Dany with no TV blood riders at all. But that, to be fair, was because the actor Ricardo left the show. They didn't just, kick him off or something. It was a lot like Greyjohn. Greyjohn just left, and they just said, okay, well, he's not in the show anymore. They didn't want to recast him because his role wasn't large enough to bother sending a new actor in there. They've already done that a few times, and it was confusing. So they don't need to keep doing that. Okay. Let us move on a bit here. Let's talk about our ratings for the episode. We'll have some fun with giving it a ranking. We'll move to our credits, and then we'll take a short break and come back with post-credits fun, including Worry of the Week and discussion of what we've learned about Episode 5 so far. Okay, so what did you guys give it? I have been starting with my ratings, so I'm going to let you guys go first this time, and I'll bring up the rear. So on the 1 to 10 scale, Lady Gwyn, you get to start this time.
Ah.
I know no one wants to be first.
No one wants to be first.
Well, you won't be first next week. At least that you'll know that much.
Thank you. That's very fair. Okay. I think I'm going to give it an 8. There was still a lot of good stuff. Wow, the John and Sansa thing was just so huge for me. So, yeah.
Cool. Okay, 8.0. What about you, yolkboy?
I think, Aziz, I will give it a very solid 7.5. I thought it was
Cool.
altogether a good episode. I've said there's a couple of things I didn't like, but no big deal. I thought it was very enjoyable TV.
So I think we're going to be we're not too far off each other, but a little more than usual. I'm going to give it an 8.5. I really liked it. I enjoyed rewatching it. I had problems with it too, as I always do, but the problems were lesser than usual, and I'm generally a pretty positive guy about the show. So I'll stick with that. I'll say 8.5. Still ties my highest rating for the season. I haven't given anything a 9 yet. Maybe that'll happen. So at the end of this season, we'll give the whole season a rating, and at this point, it's going to blow season 5 out of the water unless it takes a serious downturn. Fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But it might end up at this pace. It might end up maybe not challenging season 1 for the best season, but firmly establishing itself as number 2 is a distinct possibility. The way, of course, we're only 2/5 of the way, 40%, 4 out of 10, whatever number you want to look at it, it's all the same. Still a lot to go. So that's cool. Looking forward to that. All right, let's do some credits and acknowledgments, and we've saved extra time to talk about the future of this season and a couple other things as well as what's coming up on episode 5. So let us say thanks to First Lord Cash Craig, Hand of the King, Lord of Minds, Lord of Makers, and the Black Pupil, and the Hidden Man. That's your latest one, the Hidden Man. Lord Jim the Fortuitous of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire blog is our Warden of the West. Lord George Stormsville the Cunning is Lord of the Chiliad and Ward of the East. Lord John Reed of Castle Woodbridge is the Lord Borealis, the Light of the North and Warden of the North. And Lady Kelly McMath, of Covington, Lady of the Villa Hills and Crescent Springs, Warden of the South. Rory the Rogue, Archer Extraordinaire, is our King Beyond the Wall, working hard to subjugate the cannibal Fen tribes. He's moved south into greener pastures to see what's there. Lord James Inkblade is our Scholar Knight and Master of Whisperers. We have a new Grand Maester, but working on that nickname, so that's in development still, but very proud and happy to announce that. A real-world doctor, very appropriate, rather. Lord Robert Jacobs is our Master of Coin. Rosie the Clever is our Master of Laws. Lord James Tuttle is our Master of Ships. We have Lady Direliz of Castle Naki as the Alpha Patron. Lord Dan of the Red Mountains and Castle Great Bell is Breaker of the Second Stone. Lord Skip of the Veldt is Lord of Castle Ganges. Cabethian Frozen is Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light. Mary Meg is Lady of the Bloody Stepstones. Gregor the Toasty is Lord of the Bread Fort. Alicia Everlasting of the Green Blood is Lady of Desert Rose. Geoffrey the Unflinching is Lord of Sand Lake. Lord Greybay is of the Queen City. Lord Ryan is of Castle Stonegate and Guardian of the Rocky Mountain Pass. Lord Garin de Haviland is of Devil's Hand Keep. Lord Brandon Slate is the North Hammer, Harbinger of the Old Gods. Lady Bram is Light of Winter's Garden and Beacon of the Northwest. Lord Mark Joseph is the Snow in Winterfell. Ashlyn Winter is the Hawk's Eye, Lady of Castle Skyfall. And Lady Mikkel of Moonacre is leader of the Werewood Protectorate Alliance. Also thanks to King's Justice Sir Troy the Steady, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Blade Fate, Lord Commander Dubbington, the Red Bear of our History of Westeros Kingsguard, and the History of Westeros Night's Watch is led by Lord Commander George the Golden, who one of his questions was posed in this episode, and he is assisted by First Ranger Fabian Flowers, the bastard of Greenshield. Again, as always, go to historyofwesteros.com to learn more about getting your own cool title like that, have it read on the show, or posted on our supporters page. Great way to keep the show strong and functional. Okay, we'll take a quick ad break and come back with our post-episode discussion. If you do not want to be spoiled on topics from episode 5, we've got probably more than the usual number of spoilers. The trailers were a bit more revealing than usual, maybe not intentionally so, but we figured some things out. So we've got a lot to say on that. If you don't want to be spoiled, See you next time. See you next week, either on Monday and or Wednesday. We appreciate you choosing History of Westeros for your show reviews and book reader analysis. So, with that, we'll take a quick break and come right back. Okay, episode 5 chatter, post-credits fun. Here's the description from HBO. Tyrion seeks a strange ally. Bran learns a great deal. Brienne goes on a mission. Arya is given a chance to prove herself. Now, we've seen them be real sneaky with these descriptions before. As we talked about at length in prior episodes, the Night's Watch stands behind Alistair Thorne was a total trick. They were literally standing behind him when stuff was going down, when the wildlings were invading, so that's pretty funny. One of the things not mentioned in that description is the Ironborn, but we know that's coming from the trailer. The Kingsmoot is in play, something that we, back in maybe Season 4, probably thought we would never see. Maybe we thought the Ironborn were being largely dispensed with. When Dario mentioned that he captured the 91 Myronese ships, we thought, well, there's the ships Dany needs. But those ships got burned. So, hey, Ironborn making a comeback. The interesting thing about this scene at the Kingsmoot is there's no sign of Euron. He kills Balon, then vanishes, and I assume he's going to show up right at the right moment. What's interesting about that shot, Asha, God, I did it again, Yara says, I claim the Salt Throne. And you can see this great shot there on the top of this high hill, and you can see the ocean laid out behind them and in front of them, and there's nothing there. It's just ocean. But then a second later is a shot of a ton of Ironborn ships. They certainly appear to be Ironborn ships. Can't tell if they're coming or going, but it could be Euron like making a big splash, arriving, saying, hey, I claim the Salt Throne, blankety blank. Theon accusing Yara. Important point there. You know, we didn't really talk about Theon and Yara very much. There wasn't a whole lot to say, but this is interesting because Yara accuses Theon of what Euron's about to do. She says, oh, you show up right before the Kingsmoot? You know, expecting me to believe that you're just here by coincidence? Well, yeah, that's, well, wrong. You're accusing the wrong person of that. We all know what's coming there. Euron's going to show up, and well, we don't know what he's going to do exactly, but we know he's going to show up. We know it's going to be interesting. And I wonder, are those ships arriving or leaving, or is that, I don't know. It's really cool. I'm eager to find out more about the Ironborn. I'm really ready to see Pilu Asbeck, the actor playing Euron, in action. You guys have any thoughts on this upcoming Ironborn plot, or is it just kind of a wait-and-see thing?
Yeah, I think for me, kind of a wait-and-see. But I'm just going to throw out there, because we didn't really talk about Theon and Yara. And the one thing that really struck me, or one of the main things that struck me in that scene from this episode, was Yara channeling Balon, sort of sitting brooding in that chair. I just
you're right.
Really made the scene for me.
That's cool. I didn't really think of it that way. It was just kind of her. Yeah, you're totally right. Now that I'm hearing it, yeah, that really fits nicely. Like she was totally just being her father, and maybe feeling his death. You know, maybe she's still trying to carrying a little of that weight that way.
Yeah.
We also have the appearance of the Red Priestess Kinvara at Meereen, talking to Varys and Tyrion, saying, knowledge has made you powerful, but there is so much you do not know. I really don't know where this is going. I suspect it might have to do with what we're seeing in the books a bit, which is that the Red Priests in general are starting to, and the followers of R'hllor are realizing who the Savior is. They're realizing Dany's out there. She's fulfilled the prophecy. She's checked off all the boxes that indicate she is Azor Ahai, and the fanatics are being fanatic about this. So, there's a lot of reasons to be wary, of course, here. Varys, not a big fan of magic, and if the Red Priest action is going to go up a notch, that won't make him comfortable. Do you guys have any thoughts on where this Red Priestess thing is going? Do you have any insights there, or do you think it'll be a bit like the books?
No, I was just going to say it's interesting that Mel in this episode switches her prince that was promised to Jon, and as you say, it looks like the Red Priests from Volantis will be going for Dany. So it's just interesting that they're being brought up in tandem as candidates. That's my thought.
Right on. So we'll see what happens there. I'm very curious to see where they go with that. I wonder if it could lead to what I was saying earlier about maybe in the long term we'll have R'hllora fanatics going up against Faith militant, etc. That could, two groups of religious zealots fighting. Yeah, that'll end well. Now we have a very big moment, which I don't know that we expected to see so soon. But we underestimate Littlefinger's ability to travel quickly. Sansa confronts Littlefinger. Yolkboy, tell us about that.
Yeah, she says to him, "Did you know about Ramsay?" So I don't know what your two thoughts were, but I thought that he didn't know. I mean, he does say in season 5, I don't know much about you, and there was some debate whether Littlefinger was playing the game or he genuinely didn't know. But Aidan Gillen, the actor for Littlefinger, has revealed in an interview that he really did not know about Ramsay, that he was such a monster, and really that he should have known, being someone with a little bit of a spy network and so on. And Aidan Gillen calls it a rare mistake by his character, and it's quite a mistake if Sanders' his main piece in his game. What a mistake to make.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see where this confrontation happens. It appears to be happening at Castle Black. I'm not 100% sure of that, but it's indoors, which means the army gets there. Not only gets there really fast, but they go to the wall, which is kind of odd. It's not super odd. That's where Stannis went, but I would wonder why they went there. Maybe they was to just assume, like Ramsay does and everybody else, that Sansa would head to Jon Snow. So it could just be that, and so he's kind of noodled that out. Still, it's a little strange how quickly they arrive, so we'll have to wait and see. And what matters here isn't necessarily the truth of whether he really did know about Ramsay or not, but whether he can convince Sansa that he didn't, whether she could be convinced that. So, yeah. Lady Gwyn, what about you? What do you think about this?
Well, I think you may have just alluded to it. About Littlefinger's teleporter, and he's arrived in the Vale with the news that Sansa's just escaped Ramsay. So there's no kind of.
Where was he
where
in between?
Was he all that time? Because we last saw him in like episode 7 or so.
He was at King's Landing for a while, so I guess he's.
Then he kind of talked to Olenna, and then he just disappeared. We didn't see him. We know Walda had time to have a baby and all this stuff. So what was he doing? Traveling. I guess here in this case, maybe he spent all those months traveling.
He actually traveled this
time. Going to get a Falcon and all that stuff. But now he's going to appear at the wall with an army. So his teleporter is vastly increased in size, and he's going to fit 20,000 people inside it and speed his way up to the wall to talk to Sansa next episode.
Right on. Okay, well, also Arya and Jaqen seem to be making a comeback. They were in the first 3 episodes and not in this last one. He hands her what appears to be a vial of poison, I would assume, and says something along the lines of, "Does death only come for the wicked and leave the decent behind?" Which, given the description, which is that Arya is given a chance to prove herself, it sounds like she's being told to kill somebody who's not a bad person, somebody that she would be uncomfortable killing. It sounds like she argues against this killing, and Jaqen says, "Look, this is what we do. Death comes to everyone, not just the good people. It's not the good people who get succor and the evil people who get, their karmic justice." So it sounds like a moral dilemma a bit. Maybe this is what we'll see leading towards Arya's distancing herself or leaving the Faceless Men, if not something along the lines that we predicted of her being sent to Old Town to meet Sam. Either way, really curious to see where it's going, because as we've been saying for quite a while, Arya's plotline is kind of hard to figure. It's hard to see where it's going, not in a bad way, just how does this tie into the main plot? Do you guys have any thoughts on what's next for Arya, or is this still just who knows?
Well, if she goes rogue from the Faceless Men, you can see her. This is an idea that's been around that I thought of myself too. She could head to the Riverlands and play out the Lady Stoneheart role if they're looking for someone to take over that kind of role. That's a possibility. I mean, it seems like a long way, but the show can do things like that, I think.
Yeah. The idea of going rogue is interesting to me as it pertains to the possibility that she takes Jaken's role and goes to the Citadel, shows up in Old Town, meets Sam, which would help them accomplish the book version of Arya and Sam meeting in Bravos. Now, perhaps they're taking it a step further. I kind of doubt this, but I want to throw it out there. There's a deep theory running through the fandom, the book fandom, that Jaqen is a rogue, faceless man too, that he's doing things kind of on his own a bit. There's evidence for that is pretty circumstantial, but it's worth considering. And so if he is going rogue and he's at the Citadel, well then if Arya goes rogue and she's at the Citadel, then that kind of ties together nicely. So keep that possibility in mind, folks. Not a lot of evidence to support it, but thematically and, in a sense, the way they like to combine plot lines and mash things down a bit, I could see that happening. But the Jaqen going rogue thing isn't on very strong footing in the first place. But it's certainly possible. So that's cool. We'll see where that's going. Maybe Arya will leave Bravos this season. Maybe not. I do think it'll be the season. What do you guys think? You think, just guess, just off the top of your head, Arya stays and is gone from Bravos by the end of the season or not?
I hope we see her making a move in the last episode. I really do. I kind of reached my tolerance with the House of the Black and White. Only a few more episodes of that I can say. I'd like to see her do something different now.
Yeah, it'll be nice to see her get involved with the main plot line again. Maybe maybe like the way she sails to Bravos at the end of season 4. She'll sail back at the end of season 6. That'd be nice.
That would be nice. I'd like to see her someplace with better lighting.
One thing I didn't notice from before, right before she gets her vision back, she's praying to the werewood face, which is, that's episode 3. That was actually pretty obvious. She just shows the werewood face, and then it comes down, and she's just sitting there praying. But that's still kind of a cool little piece of visual goodness there that we did not mention. Felt like it deserved mention, even though it was episode 3. Okay, here's where it gets really cool. We're going to see Bran. Doesn't look like there'll be any more Tower of Joy stuff. Looks like they're still kind of keeping that on deck, I suppose. It's coming, but not yet. What we do see is Bran standing before a huge army of the dead, and behind him, this was really cool when I stopped the TV and paused and looked at the scene in close up. There was a big tree covered in ice where Bran was in between that and the army. And around the tree were all these black stones, like obelisks, like really not natural. And it looked really cool, and I really wonder what the heck is going on there. And this is, I guess, that scene from the trailer, preseason trailers, where Night King grabs Bran's hand, and he's like, man, he's looking around, he's all terrified. And we see Mira trying to wake Bran up, like, Bran, wake up. Is it because he's stuck in this vision and bad things are happening? Or is something like happening right that moment in the cave? It could be a bit of misdirection, like, Bran, you got to wake up. Stuff's going down. I'm really excited about this. What do you guys have to say about that? Is that just a who knows kind of thing, or do you have some additional insight?
Oh, it is a bit of a who knows, isn't it? It's the complete unknown now. This is well beyond anything in the books. And when I heard this episode, it's called The Door, isn't it? This next episode?
I believe so.
I really thought we were going to go and see Lyanna in her bed of blood. But no, it doesn't seem that way at all, does it? I don't think they can do this Night's King scene and go back to the Tower of Joy. So
yeah, 2 Bran visions in one episode seems too much, right?
Yeah.
So there's another spoilery thing from this. Now, HBO Now had briefly a cover photo for their description of the next episode, which was moved and changed to something else after being up a short while. A few people pointed this out to us, so thank you, clever watchers, observant watchers, for giving us this tidbit. It's a shot of 4 children of the forest kneeling, kind of, not kneeling, but crouching by some trees. One of them is definitely Leaf. It's the same actress for sure, but there's no snow behind them. They're standing in the wilderness, and it's completely sunny and green, so it's clearly a vision. Who knows how long in the past it is? And this is very hard to figure too, but really cool. Now, Bloodraven's already been aged up, the three-eyed Bloodraven. So perhaps the children will be aged up as well. They're supposed to live a few hundred years or something like that. So if we're seeing a really long time ago a vision, which already, I'm already contradicting myself, Yolkboy. We just said that they probably won't have two visions in the same episode, but yet this vision probably has nothing to do with the Night's King vision because of the lack of snow. So maybe we are getting two visions, or maybe it's not a vision. But I don't know how that could be given the greenery, so I'm a bit confused. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on this? Well, real quick before you do, our listener and Lord supporter, Gregor the Toasty, suggests the aging of Bloodraven could be related to this scene in a sense that, like I said, that the children will be aged up, or it could be some sort of like Bloodraven knew the Night's King, maybe even personally, or has prior experience with him. And since we don't think the Night's King is even a character in the books, this takes us in a direction that we really can't predict, especially because even if he was in the books, the book hasn't gotten to that point yet. So that was a long way of me setting you guys up to give your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Well, I think, it could be one long vision. The description says Bran learns a great deal, and so I wonder if it's just this sort of like montage through history kind of thing, in which case that could explain Mirror trying to wake him up if he's been kind of inside for so long. He's had that warning about staying for too long inside the vision, so that could explain that. So we'll see.
That is very cool. I like that idea a lot. The old, you stay in there too long and you drown. That's something we definitely talked about in previous episodes. That's a very good piece of insight there. I like that idea. Okay, unless you guys have any more thoughts, let's do our worry of the week and our newly armored and plot secondary featurette added on to our worry of the week. Rickon, obviously, still on the list. That hasn't changed. We could take Osha off, sadly, not for the good reason. Littlefinger, again, I mentioned this in the show only review. I think he's not going to get it soon, but I think he's going to continue to talk his way out of things for now. I don't think that Sansa's going to have him killed if he shows up with a Vale army prepared to help. If his reckoning will have to wait until they make use of his soldiers, which they really do need, given the numbers we were shown there: 2,000 wildlings, 5,000 Bolton's soldiers. That's just not going to cut it. They need those Vale soldiers. So I don't think Sansa can take any kind of revenge or punishment on Littlefinger with that bigger problem looming. But I don't know that he's going to survive this season. Maybe he dies early the next season. But he as the show transitions more to the higher magic epic arc of the White Walkers fully invading, the top schemers just have less to do. What scheming can be done in the face of that? I don't know. I'm dubious that Littlefinger has a role to play later, but I'm sure confident that whatever happens, it's going to be cool and fun and interesting. But I don't know. It's a tough one. Loras for me is on the list now for sure. What do you got? Do you guys have any thoughts on Loras? Do you think maybe he's gonna he's asking to be put out of his misery, possibly, if that's the right interpretation? And if the High Sparrow's got some sort of trick plan, like we sort of think is a very strong possibility, that could go bad for Loras. I think Marjorie's a little more likely to survive because I think the High Sparrow wants to control her. But Loras is not part of that plan. You guys have any thoughts on Loras on this list? You kind of agree with me, or maybe think he's safer than that?
No, I think he's definitely kind of doomed. Remember, we don't really know what's happened with Loras in the books.
Yeah, he might be dead in the books or dying in the books already. Yeah.
Could be, although there are lots of theories surrounding that. But I've said before that I wouldn't be surprised if the High Septon tried to use him in some way against Cersei, thereby ridding himself maybe of one, or guaranteeing that he's going to get rid of one of them. Offer Loras a deal or something. However it pans out, I think Loras is pretty much doomed.
Yeah, he's the toasty, like Lord Gregor. Although he probably won't be burned, and he certainly won't be bread. Now Theon again, since we didn't talk about him much this episode, we've kind of talked about him dispersed throughout the episode rather than focus on him here. I wonder, in the same light, what role does he have now? It's really unclear to see what could he possibly do. Is he going to go with Asha and help her in Volantis to help bring Dany? Like, does that make sense? Euron probably doesn't want him around, and if Euron's going to take over, then Euron is going to want him gone completely. And it's hard to use the book as a predictor here because Theon is, captive of Stannis at this point in the books. And we've talked about how he seems in pretty bad shape in the book too. Like, it's hard to imagine how he's going to get out of this predicament. How the Northern Lords all want him dead for what he did. Is that how this is going to play out? Is he going to be? He's just going to die here in the Iron Islands instead of being killed by Stannis, since Stannis isn't exactly around to do that on his end. And Stannis wanted to keep him around because of his knowledge of Winterfell. Well, now that's taken care of by Jon being the one that has knowledge of Winterfell, being involved in the plan to attack Winterfell. So they don't need Theon. They don't have Jon in the book for that. So, yeah, it's all different characters playing different roles. It gets a bit confusing here. Now, we can talk about, well, unfortunately, Yolkboy's connection seems to have died a little bit before the end here. So I'll say what he was going to say here about Mel and Davos. He's still worried about Mel with the Davos and Shireen thing, how that could come to a head. But he suggests that will probably not come to a head for a little longer. So maybe this is a advanced worry of the week rather than kind of like Littlefinger, rather than, something that's going to happen maybe next episode. And that's just how they do it. It's the smaller deaths that happen earlier in the season, and the bigger deaths happen towards the end. Of course, there's exceptions, like Joffrey, but that's the general pattern. What about you, Lady Gwyn? Do you have anyone to add to this list?
I do, and I think I'm going to be an outlier because I'm looking down at our Armored and Plot notes, and I think we may not agree on this, but
that's good.
It shows that we do have different opinions about things. I think Dario, I'm worried for him. The look on his face when Dany emerged from the flames said a lot to me. I don't think he can really be her lover anymore. So
he's been saying that too, like, yeah, she's going to get bored of me eventually. Well, I'll disappoint her eventually. So, yeah.
I really think his day is done, and I'm not sure what kind of purpose he serves right now, but you might have different ideas. I think that's a good segue to the next section.
Yeah, well, you're right. I'm with you that he's eventually doomed. I do not see him having a long-term role, and that applies to the book as well. I think, he's a hostage right now of the slavers, and obviously Barristan ordered the Windblown to go try to save him. Don't know if that's going to happen or not, whether it's going to be successful. But yeah, Dario is war and woe. As Dany says, it's hard to, and she's got plenty of that already. She's already going to have a hard time bringing her people over to Westeros, all these foreigners and people with different beliefs, with this xenophobic culture at Westeros. It's already going to be difficult without Dario picking fights left and right and doing his thing. So yeah, she's probably better off without him. Barristan says the same. So, but what I mean is that he at least temporarily is safe, because I thought he might die during this particular plot line. I agree that his doom is, on the horizon at some point, but for now he's safe. He's not going to die, maybe not next episode, but yeah, he might make it till the end of the season. He might make it till next season, but yeah, maybe he lives long enough to die to the walkers. Get to Westeros and fall to some walker. Now, actually, speaking of that, before we talk about Newly Armored and Plot, as one detail I missed that I wanted to mention, and I think you may have had some thoughts on this as well, Lady Gwyn. Looking at the prosthetics for the Children of the Forest and looking at the prosthetics for Night's King. Now, I think it's silly. The idea that Jon and Mira are related because of how they look, I think that's a bit silly. It's not a bad thought, but you unpack it, it becomes silly. In other words, like, they didn't pick her because she looks like Jon Snow, and they don't look at all alike in the books. Right. So I really don't think there's anything to that. But this is prosthetics. These are designed a specific way. And you look at the eyes of those children, and you look at the eyes of the others. Well, the children don't have blue eyes, but they've got a very similar quality. Would you agree with that, Lady Gwyn?
I would agree, and I would also point out, I was just reading an article about, I think it was an interview with Michelle Clapton, who was the costume designer, talking about how it was Quaithe and Melisandre, actually, but she drew purposeful links between Quaithe and Melisandre in their costuming and their accessories. So we know the show does use costuming and makeup and that sort of thing as ways to draw links between things. So I think that this is very interesting, the clear similarity between the prosthetics and the makeup.
And we have long, in the fandom as a whole, suspected a connection between the others and the Children of the Force. This is not just an idea out of nowhere. It's not based solely on the similar eyes and similar ridging of the forehead, which is also another detail that they have in common. Very interesting. That's really cool. And maybe we'll learn something about that connection in this next episode, because like you said, Bran learns a lot of things, and we have already seemed to be seeing at least two different scenes from his visions. So yeah, very cool, really neat. I hope that develops into something. I hope we learn some more, and it definitely could apply to the books. I don't think this is something that the showrunners can just entirely make up on their own, because I don't know that they would have thought of it on their own. So I imagine George had to tell them, if that's what's happening at all. Maybe not. So in closing for this episode, I will mention Ramsay also belongs on the worry of the week, but we're not worried. We're more like, please kill him of the week. Please die of the week.
Right. So, but we unfortunately suspect he's in that, at least for now.
Yeah.
Not going anywhere. Because
he's going to be in that big final battle, which will happen whenever, episode 8, 9, or 10, probably. And maybe he doesn't make it out of that alive, but he's at least going to last that long. So a little more Ramsay for now. We'll have to live with him. Just hopefully he doesn't kill Rickon first. Although it sort of seems like a slender hope. It's still a hope, nonetheless.
Clinging to that thin reed of
yes, that narrow reed.
Very, very, very narrow. Yes.
Okay, everybody, thanks again for tuning in to History of Westeros. Thank you to the Radio Westeros team. Lady Gwyn, you can tell people where to find you. Yolkboy, we don't know where to find him. He's vanished.
You can find our podcast at www.radiowesteros.com. We're on iTunes, and we also have a YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. We'll find Yolkboy eventually.
That's right, we will. So everybody, thanks again for tuning in. We will be back, of course, next week at the usual times with more fun Game of Thrones discussion. It will be halfway through the season at that point, almost there. So it'll also be time soon for us to announce some extra shows to discuss what's happened so far as a whole, rather than breaking down each episode. It pays sometimes to look at them as a group. So we will be announcing some plans along that regard in short order. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in again. And if you want to check out our website, you should. I highly recommend it. We've got a lot of photos from the preseason. We've got other episodes posted. We've got our history episodes and everything. We occasionally post blog posts, things like that. Also, a lot of ways to help out the show. You can support us through Patreon, of course. You've heard the titles plenty of times. You, by now, probably know what the deal is with that. You can also shop through Amazon on our site. Any link you follow that takes you to Amazon will be credited to us. No additional charge to you. Just helps out the show. It's a free roll of sorts. And if you want to check out the books in greater detail, check out the audiobooks. Audible.com subscriptions are available through our site as well. You can get a free 30-day trial, get a free book download. We recently found out that Game of Thrones is Audible.com's third most popular title. That's cool. So I guess a few of you have taken my advice at least. And listening to it on audio is a great way to combine it with chores, exercise, commutes, the most popular thing we hear from people. So check that out. Free 30-day subscription includes a free book download. If you don't like the subscription, you get to keep that free book. Win-win. Good times. All right, everybody. Valar Morghulis, Valar Re-Readus, Valar Re-Listenus, I guess, with that one. And Valar, everything else is, yeah. I'll keep coming up with new dorky things like that to say at the end of the show. Until next time, everybody, we'll see ya.